one thing, just one thing, that Christianity has introduced that doesn't have some source, some parallel, some analogy in previous and in other civilizations. One novelty, one innovation in thinking about anything, ethical, metaphysical, anything you like. And I must say I've racked my brains over this often enough, and I cannot think of one. I would love to hear if there is one.
Do you accept that challenge?
So I think the idea of humanism, the idea that humans have a kind of unique dignity, that have a kind of special status, ultimately, I think it goes back to Genesis. I think it goes back to that narrative that God creates man and woman in his own image. And that is something that then passes through into the bloodstream of European culture. And we, to this day, continue to take for granted. And so the emphasis on the kind of the idea of the human, the idea of human rights and the values and the dignity of humanity, I think that this is a deeply Western and therefore a deeply Christian idea.
We are reading this book called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God in the Wisdom Society Book Club. If you'd like to join us, the link should be right here in the description. In this book, Justin Brierley talks about how Tom Holland on the Unbelievable podcast once said that humanism is a kind of godless Protestantism. In other words, that the values that are acknowledged by humanists and that we basically live out of in the modern Western world are actually derivative of Christianity to such a large extent that we don't even realize it. Like a fish doesn't even realize the water that it's swimming in, so do we not realize how J-shaped the moral sensibilities that we have are. There was a debate that took place, basically a conversation back and forth between Tom Holland and someone who does not hold the same view at all. And they went back and forth. And his opponent here says, I want you to give me some example of something that Christianity has brought to the table that didn't pre-exist Christianity. Do you have any? I'm going to go ahead and let this clip play out in its entirety. Then I'll give you guys some of my thoughts on the back end. And I want to share with you a little snippet of the conversation that we had within the Wisdom Society around this idea of human rights, human dignity. Is it really Christian derivative, or is it universal in some other sense or in some other way? Let's get into it.
In its essentials, humanism is a kind of a very soft Protestantism. It's a godless Protestantism. Mm-hmm. And it is, in that sense, as culturally contingent as everything else in the vast range and span of human civilization. And I don't ultimately see what the problem is with acknowledging this.
Right.
I mean, if you don't believe in a God, it no more matters that you as an atheist might be informed by Christian opinions than that you as a human being are an ape. I mean, it doesn't seem to me a problem.
Humanism is divorced from the Judeo-Christian ethic, or
yes, I am, because I mean, if I were able to identify focal humanistic traditions in non-Christian societies, then you might believe that humanism is something that could quite easily come out of reflection and consideration. So it happened in classical antiquity in Greece. It happened in the thinking of Aristotle and the post-Aristotelian schools.
Do you believe that
it happened in China 2 centuries before Christ? Mo-Tzu, the founder of the Maoist movement, taught love your brother, love your neighbor as yourself. This idea, it's a very, very, very fundamental humanist principle, that one. The Jains and the Buddhists in India, centuries before Christ, were teaching the same thing. Not only compassion, and all-embracing compassion, but not just for other human beings, for all life, for animal life. I mean, something more tender in its outlook even than the Christian view. These are recognizably and focally humanistic impulses that we're recognizing in these different traditions. They don't owe anything to any one particular tradition. They come out of this sense that we have as human beings of being connected to one another. There's a marvelous remark in one of Hazlitt's essays where he and Coleridge went for a walk on the North Somerset coast, and they came to a village where the day before there had been a terrible storm and a boy had been swept out to sea, and the fishermen in the village had risked their lives to try to save him. And Coleridge asked them, well, why did you do that? Why did you risk your lives to do that? And the fisherman said, it's because we have a nature towards one another. And that encapsulates something human that doesn't require myth, It doesn't require myth in the case of the Jains and the Buddhists and the Mohists. It just requires a sense of our common shared humanity.
But the idea that humans have rights, that they have a peculiar dignity, is a myth. And it seems to me so evident that this myth is Christian in its origins. The idea that by cherry picking fragments from other cultural traditions, you can demonstrate that the beliefs that you hold as someone living in London in 2019, you and all your fellow humanists, all of whom, with the single exception of one city, have all been held in basically Christian countries. Humanism is so derivative of Christianity. And yet, because, like Christianity, it wants to claim a universal mission, just as Christians claimed as evidence for this that Greek philosophy was part of its inheritance. So likewise, you are engaged in this mass exercise of cultural appropriation, picking stuff to demonstrate that the entirely contingent views that you personally have, and that I have too, are somehow not bred of the culture in which we've emerged, but are in fact somehow universal. I mean,
Tom is engaged here in an act of attempted appropriation to one tradition in one part of the world of things that are manifestly and obviously predate by many, many, many centuries across the globe, ethical impulses which humanism happens to capture. I would ask Tom this, and this is a surprising question maybe, to nominate for me one thing, just one thing, that Christianity has introduced that doesn't have some source, some parallel, some analogy in previous and in other civilizations. One novelty, one innovation in thinking about anything, ethical, metaphysical, anything you like. And I must say I've racked my brains over this often enough, and I cannot think of one. I would love to hear if there is one.
Do you accept that challenge?
Absolutely. I think the ideal of lifelong matrimony, I think that's a very distinctive Christian concept. I think the category of what by the 19th century is coming to be categorized as homosexuality and heterosexuality, I think they have no precedence. I think the notion of secularism, the idea of there being religions, I think all these are entirely exclusive to Christian civilization. I think the concept of science as it emerges in the 19th century, I think is entirely exclusive to Christian civilization. I think the idea that human beings are created in the image of God, that is obviously something that Christians share with Jews, but that is it gives a degree of dignity to human beings that no other cultural tradition that I'm aware of even remotely approximates to. So I think that all of those are and essentially what I'm talking in giving that is I am talking about what makes Western civilization distinctive. And one of the things that absolutely makes Western civilization distinctive, and it's an inheritance of its Christian past, is its assumption that its values are universal. This has been fundamental to the way that Christians have understood their faith, that it is for all of humanity. And to this day, the heirs of that cultural tradition want to believe that their values are not contingent, but somehow are the property of all humanity.
Okay, so now with that in view, here's a little cherry on the top. Like I said, just a few minutes worth of dialogue that we had within the Wisdom Society dealing with this same topic. Enjoy.
All men are created equal. And without a Christian worldview, that doesn't make any sense at all, because people are born into different economic classes, or, they have different levels of intelligence, their different wealth and privilege, and to think that all men are created equal, that sounds absurd unless you're thinking of it before God. Before God, we are all created equal, and no one, despite their status and outward appearances, we all stand equally before him.
Yeah, and remember how in the book, I don't know what page this was on, but he was saying that the humanist basis for human value is basically that we can reason. And one thing that I think that's interesting about that is that certainly there would then be a spectrum of value based on the extent to which someone can reason. In other words, the greater level of development you have mentally, apparently the greater value you have. If reason is the basis for value, then, for example, Gabriel is more valuable than me, and I'm more valuable than my newborn baby, right? If value is based on basically intellect or reason, rather than some more primary ontological reality that has been given to us by God that sets us apart from the rest of creation, which is what Genesis says. But then God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and we are made in his image, a unique feature of the cosmos. And I think that biblical account actually explains human uniqueness and human value, regardless of level of development, regardless of age, ethnicity, size, location, etc. That a human being is a different thing than every other thing. The biblical account gives a sufficient basis for human uniqueness and human value, regardless of any of these other traits. But reason, as your primary value indicator, has huge ethical problems attached to it. Basically, the higher IQ, the more valuable, or how far do we want to go with this thing? So I think it's a very interesting point that you're making. If you enjoyed this conversation, you would almost certainly enjoy the Wisdom Society. You can find out more about the Wisdom Society here. We have resident experts like Stephen Meyer, Hugh Ross, Paul Copan, and upcoming in November, Justin Brierley will be joining us as we discuss his book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Click here, find out more, and I hope to see you guys there.